Now, we're all stressed at one time or another, whether it's about work or home or relationships. But at the moment, we're being brought together about stress about one particular thing. Dare we mention its name, COVID-19. And speaking of stress and bringing us together, here is Bas Tadros, clinical hypnotherapist and life coach, to talk about stress and great ways to manage it, particularly at this very difficult time. So, Bas, COVID-19. Why is stress so bad for us?
Well, stress in itself is actually probably more dangerous than the virus itself. I think stress impacts us both physically and mentally, and the impacts of it, it could go from a physical manifestation in terms of like neck pain, shoulder stress, pain that you hold onto your body, and then you need to get adjusted, or you need to go see a chiro or a physio about, to all sorts of other things. Cancer can be a prolonged cause of undiagnosed or unresolved stress. So stress in itself can actually have more dangerous impact on people's lives physically and mentally than this virus. I mean, just doing some research to stay informed about this virus, and one of the things that I've realized is that the sheer fear and panic that's out there in the global community is actually in itself, again, more dangerous than the virus itself. The virus itself, if you could look at it, from a holistic point of view, is probably no different to what we'd experience with the flu. And the flu season, when it comes around, it impacts about the same population of people anyway. And so, sure, coronavirus has its own statistics and it has its devastation, so we're not underplaying it, and there's no point in thinking that it's not serious. It's serious, but serious within its own sort of respect. And if we put it all into perspective, it doesn't require all that panic and people going out and doing things that are out of the norm. The first things that I would probably say from my view that people could do is try and maintain a norm. Don't think about not going to places that you would normally go to. Don't think about not sending your kids to school unless that's something that becomes a norm all of a sudden. But for now, do the things that are the norm. Taking toilet paper off the shelves is not the norm, and wiping things out. So, for example, if I was to go shopping with my wife and we were to buy a packet of rice and there was 2 packets of rice left on a shelf, we wouldn't take both. We'd think about the next person that might need it, and we'd take one and leave one for others. And that should apply to, I guess, all sorts of different things that you'd want to have from the shopping centres. But, what I have seen lately, and unfortunately it's not restricted to one community, it seems like it's happening across the board, is people are making decisions out of fear and out of panic. And that's dangerous.
I guess it's part of, if we're stressed, we show that stress, and that then manifests onto other people, and we get that herd mentality of stress. So I guess we're trying to keep our own stress levels low.
Yes. Well, stress in itself, some people might say it's not contagious. Stress is actually quite contagious, and it can be so contagious. I mean, just try it. If you're on the freeway and you slam your brakes on all of a sudden because you're stressed, it's going to impact all the other drivers on the freeway. Or if you're in a tunnel and you start tooting your horn or doing something silly, it impacts everybody. Everybody starts to go into this stress response. And so I think what's happening is people aren't reacting rationally to what's going on, and they're not educating themselves enough to know exactly how they can respond to this, and maybe even how to boost their own immune system. How to, if we can think about proactive measures rather than reactive measures, we can combat stress.
Actually, what you've just said, then, proactive compared to reactive, because no one's really spoken about proactive things like taking more vitamins or being less stressed, because that's a great way to reduce your immunity, actually, isn't it?
100%. So they go hand in hand. If you over stress out your body, your mind, it impacts your immune system. And then if you're so stressed out and it's impacting you so much, it'll impact your sleep, it'll impact your defense system to naturally combat a common cold or a common flu or a virus like the coronavirus.
So what should we be doing to combat stress rather than just going out and hoarding rice and toilet paper willy-nilly?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely not one to throw out shoulds and coulds and all these things. But from my own personal view, one of the things that we can consider doing is staying calm and being mindful. And by staying calm, that doesn't mean to completely ignore the situation, but maybe it makes sense to detox from some of this information. If having this on the news, or like the other day, I opened up a newspaper and it was the first 10 pages of a newspaper, detox from all of that. If people are calling you constantly, if family members are a little bit agitated, give them the advice to detox from this, to de-stress themselves a little bit by not constantly being bombarded, because it's on our news, it's on our radio, it's on every single media, and there are actually some good news, and that's unfortunately not been circulated enough. The good news is, in China, in parts of the world that first experienced this, there are people that are not only bouncing back, but they're discovering that testing positive, being in self-isolation for 14 days, they experienced no symptoms. And then they were clear after 14 days with another test. But the funny thing is, if they didn't have the test, they wouldn't have even known they had it. So if people start to understand that, they'll realize this isn't a violent disease. This isn't something that... What is violent is the reaction out of fear and panic. And so if people could just adjust that, then this thing doesn't have to cause any more disturbance than what it already has. The disturbance that it's had on the economy, on tourism, on travel. There are people, in different industries. You talk to people that work in hotels. They're experiencing less travelers are coming to Australia or to Perth, which is our local community. But I'm sure that's happening everywhere. And so if people could just adjust through mindfulness, adjust to learn to adapt, learn to stay focused on the solution. If you're not part of the solution, then you're definitely part of the problem. And the more we can apply some clever, some calm, some sanity, some smarts, boosting your immune system may mean that you might need to take, as you were saying, supplements like, vitamin C, your B12, your vitamin D. I'm not a doctor. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and a life coach, but, consulting with a GP, and again, just checking in, am I going to a medical clinic when they are flat out, or can I call and make an appointment? Do I need to check? And it may not be that you need to go see a GP if you're not experiencing any symptoms, but what you could do is just, buy the things that you think you need to have more of. Again, like the essentials. The vitamin C is obviously an obvious one. Some people may need more vitamin D, or, B12, or whatever it may be, zinc.
So how do we detox from the whole circle of stress that we're seeing? If we still want to stay in touch with people via social media or reading the newspaper or watching the news, but we want to de-stress about the corona issue, do you have any suggestions for how to do that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, staying in touch with people is a great idea, obviously, and staying connected is important as well. But just making sure that you exit conversations that are bringing up this topic. You don't watch the news as much. You just take some time out. It doesn't have to be that you never watch the news again. Some people stay informed by watching the news. Some people even find it entertaining. It's a drama. And unfortunately, bad news seems to sell more because more people get addicted to that. Somebody asked me the other day, is fear a completely bad thing? Is it a negative thing? Fear isn't a bad thing, because fear is actually a built-in mechanism that protects lives. I mean, if you have a fear of crossing the road when there's cars there, it's mainly because you want to stay alive. So fear in itself is not a bad thing, but prolonged fear or unnecessary fear or exaggerated fear, our life isn't as scary as it used to be in caveman days. So we don't have to fear a predator on the road when we go out on the road, but common sense applies.
I guess it's having a healthy sense of self-preservation and doing the right things, mentally keeping yourself a little away from it, a little reserved from it.
Yeah.
But also, we need to remember that we're in a community.
Definitely. And so, again, going back to your question about staying on social media, but maybe not commenting if people are overly negative about coronavirus or the speculations of what might happen. There are people speculating lockdowns and things being shut down and whatever else. If that's causing you unnecessary fear, pull out of those conversations. And again, rather than being fear and panicked and reactive, be proactive. Think about what would it mean if I was to go into some sort of lockdown. Am I okay with that? Is it okay to have a silent retreat, or to have some sort of time and space at home? And how could we best make that work for us and our family? We've got 2 young kids at home, my wife and I, and we're all very healthy, but that doesn't mean that we don't make sure that we stock up on the things that the kids need a bit of, like for example, their formula, milk formula. And so by people panicking and fearing, most of the time those shelves are completely empty. And so, we've had to think about, well, what else could we do for them? How can we improve that? What could we do with our garden? Could we potentially buy and plant our own seeds and things just for fun, even if it's not going to be something that's going to grow in time and be food, and educate the kids about that. And this is a good time when change is upon us. It's a good time to re-educate, to adapt. It's time for, instead of being on social media and trying to communicate with someone outside of your household, to perhaps have family meetings and have discussions and get back to old-fashioned conversations with your wife and your kids and things like that.
It's funny you just use the word educate, because I've been seeing a lot of that floating around on social media.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a junkie for social media.
Sure.
That people are using this downtime to re-educate themselves or educate themselves,
Yeah.
learn a language or learn some kind of skill that you've actually really needed to sit down for a couple of weeks.
I know if I was in lockdown for 14 days, it'd be a great time for me to do the things that I don't normally get a chance to do. And it may be paint a feature wall. It may be to sit down and do a recording, or to write some notes towards my next book, or to sit down with my boys and work or play a board game that they really want to play, or work out on something that we can educate ourselves on. And education, I think you're never too old or too young for education.
So maybe that's how we should leave this, Bass. Maybe we should let people have a think about what they'd like to learn.
Mm-hmm.
If you were stuck inside for 2 weeks and couldn't go outside, what would you like to learn, or what would you like to do, or some project that you would like to finish? I know I've got a bunch of them. Do you, Bass? What are you going to do?
Absolutely. I'll write my next program on de-stress and and how to remove stress out of your life.
Perfect. This is Bass Tardros and Jane Hibberton for WTV.